I think the Pentax 6x7 is cursed. Pentax 6.7 round 3. Let's see if I can actually get along with this camera now. Some photos with the Pentax 6x7. One more time with the Pentax 6x7, trying to get a little more footage. The Pentax 6x7 was introduced in 1969 and resembles a very large and heavy traditional SLR, and it's surprisingly useful despite this. It has a terrible 1/30th of a second flash sync speed, but it has a really wonderful 1/1000th of a second shutter speed, which is a rarity for cameras of this size. I first picked up a Pentax 6x7 non-MLU in a trade back in February. I got it with 75 and 45mm lenses, but not the famous 105mm 2.4. A while ago I made a video about how I shoot everything at like f8 or something, and I'm not quite that hardcore on it anymore, but there is a lot of merit to that viewpoint. I was definitely concerned that the buttery smooth 2.4 bokeh would seduce me, basically. I'd like to talk about my Patreon for just a second. I'm posting all the photos you see on this video on there, but in higher resolution. Stare at them as long as you want. I made a Patreon exclusive post a few days ago about how dependent my YouTube workflow is on circumstances and technical things going as expected. If there are technical problems like my GoPro overheating, which is a common issue lately, I can lose large chunks of my behind the scenes footage. Not to bag on my GoPro, for example, when I got my Pentax 6x7 back in February, I tested it out and it had the common frame spacing issue, so I sent it off for repair. It came back from that repair with the same issue and also proceeded to break completely when I tried to shoot a roll of panoramic adapted film in it. When I got it back from $500 of repair jobs, and I took it out to test with, first you saw Honor and then here's Natalia. I kind of found it pretty uninspiring, and I was beginning to think that it might only look good with the 105mm 2.4 lens. It's not that I thought the lenses I have were bad or anything, it's just they weren't really stunning either, especially compared to something like Mamiya glass. But they don't also look terrible. But another problem was that I found it extremely difficult to focus. This was combined in part with a dim viewfinder and also just my bad eyes, but there were correction lenses, so I was going to start looking into that. But yeah, the overheating GoPro leaves me without any of my behind the scenes footage that basically is the heart of every video I make. I only have so many photo shoots I can do in a month, and I've been bringing a Pentax 6x7 with me for several of them, including all the way back to February. This was going to be the month that I just finally got it all done, and especially after I traded with Marina, whose Analog Diaries, who you should definitely follow, for a Pentax 6x7 with the classic 105 2.4 lens. I especially thought it was going to be the time I got it done. Just like my first 6x7, this has the quirk where you have to stop winding a little early to get 10 frames on the roll. As you can see, the pictures on the Ektachrome turned out great, and the 2.4 aperture on the 105mm lens not only gave it that legendary fall off that this lens is known for, but it also made the viewfinder brighter, which made it easier to focus, although I would still require a corrective lens on it. You'll see that in a second. Unfortunately, I also tried shooting a roll of panoramic adapted Velvia 35mm film, and I checked pieces. I don't think they messed up anything, but for some strange reason I didn't hit focus on any of them except for a single photo, and this has happened more than once. The only thing I can do now is maybe shoot it without the adapters at all and see if it does anything, and everything else looked like this. So that's a whole roll, and that was the only footage the GoPro worked for, so that was another one out. So you're seeing how this is adding up to a really frustrating month of art and YouTube video making. And so finally, I had a semi-successful shoot with Tiffany here. I kind of underexposed the beginning of this roll of Fuji Pro 400H because I forgot to change the ISO on the light meter, which is totally a rookie mistake. But really, it can happen to anyone at any time, especially when dealing with a newer camera. I tried for some window light and it was a little too dim even for the 2.4 aperture of the lens. But I do have to say that as much as I really didn't want to love it, the 105 2.4 is such a good lens, and the faster lens really does help a lot, especially in low light. Also, thank you to my patrons listed here on the screen. You can join for as little as $1 a month. Information is in the description. Thank you. And the faster lens also helps the viewfinder be a lot brighter, and this at least made it tolerable, but it was still, for the size of the viewfinder, kind of difficult for me to focus. However, some research led me to the Nikon DK17C eyepiece, which basically fit the eyepiece on the Pentax 6x7, basically. So this time I come with a correction lens on the Pentax 6x7, which I'm hoping will make it easier for me to focus and not miss every shot like I did the last time. And thankfully it mostly worked, except everything I shot with the panoramic mask was definitely not well focused, and I'm really starting to think that something is throwing the film plane off, and I don't know, that's another problem for down the road. Because after doing this whole shoot and thinking I'd finally kind of gotten a grip on this camera and doing some things that I thought was really fun that I will be sharing in a future video, I developed the C41 film in here only to discover that the Blix had gone very bad, and I didn't know until it was too late. And here you go, my unintentional film soup, which kind of works for it, honestly, even though it's not really what I was going for. I'm just really glad I shot some cinema film for this, because even the E6, even though it looks nicer, didn't go exactly as I had hoped. So I love the Cinestill kits but for E6, but they can be so demanding, which also goes into play for this shoot, which I decided would look great on slide film as well. And I wouldn't know about these chemicals maybe being a little bad until after this shoot. But we started shooting outside, and I was shooting a roll of expired Kodak Portra 160 NC, which I shot around 80, which made it a little difficult when I started shooting indoors, but I still got some nice stuff I enjoyed. And once again, the 2.4 aperture of the 105mm lens really helped a lot. I decided to just not deal with the panoramic mask today, but as you can see, the expired Portra turned out okay for being super expired, and I still had focusing issues, but to be fair, 2.4 is like a razor thin depth of field, so you're gonna miss more often. I also shot some Ektachrome. It too was definitely messed up by the E6 chemistry, and I definitely realize I'm talking about chemistry and it's not the camera's fault. It just seems to happen a lot when I use this camera. But thankfully, mostly spared was this roll of Fujifilm Velvia 50, which despite being dark, which I managed thankfully to fix in post, the colors are just magnificent. I really think it's just an utterly lovely portrait film, and I'm gonna have to do this more before they yank it away from us. That said, I don't think there are any current rumors of Velvia 50 going away, just for the record. With all the half year of frustration going on with the Pentax, I decided it was time to take my trusty Hasselblad back out, and I shot these photos with Mace. And part of it was just to return to something more familiar and stable for me, but I also wanted to contrast it versus the Pentax 6x7. The 6x7, and I'm assuming the rest of the 6x7 or 6.7 family, are really truly wonderful cameras. They really are much more SLR-like than something like the Mamiya RB or RZ cameras, and the 105 2.4 lens is truly something special. And the 6x7 format is absolutely wonderful to work with, but a lot of this, as you'll hear so often, comes down to how does the camera work with you and how does the camera work in your workflow. There's a lot of FOMO going on with film photographers insofar as using different types of cameras or different models or different lenses and the effects those could have on your photography. Mostly from an artistic perspective, I think it's good to try out different formats of cameras, and if you can, absolutely try out like all the big shots. But don't necessarily think that you're missing out because you can't shoot a certain brand or model of camera. If you get to shoot a square camera or a 6x7 or something like that, you'll get the idea if the format might be the thing that you're looking for. Cameras as tools can be better conduits for our creativity, but they're not the source of the creativity. And that's probably obvious, but sometimes it can be easy to forget about it, getting lost down the gear rabbit hole. I will say that it can be a bit of a trap to shoot with the shallow depth of field thing, especially when it looks as absolutely stunning as that 105 2.4 does. But since I do have personal experience with it and several other cameras, I will say that if this is the camera you wind up with, you'll probably be fine. I would say to be very careful with the quality of it, and maybe the MLU or the later models probably would be better ideas. But other than that, you can't really go wrong, I'm sure. So good luck with it. Keep pressing ahead and keep making photographs and keep shooting film. Click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you can find out when I make my next post. Like this video, comment, subscribe, and I will see you soon. Thank you.